In July 2013, Detroit, Michigan became the largest city in U.S. history to file for bankruptcy. The debt, roughly $20 billion, was the result of decades of decline, corruption, and failed financial engineering. Detroit's collapse wasn't sudden. It was the end of a slow-motion disintegration that began long before any courtroom hearing. At mid-century, Detroit was the industrial capital of the world. 2 million residents, strong unions, and the big three automakers powered America's middle class. Then, the jobs began to leave. Automation, foreign competition, and suburban flight gutted the city's tax base. After the 1967 riots, racial segregation deepened and white flight accelerated. By 2013, Detroit had lost more than 60% of its population. Neighborhoods emptied. 40 square miles of the city were vacant. With fewer taxpayers, services collapsed. Police and fire departments were understaffed. Streetlights failed. Average ambulance response time was nearly an hour. The city was too large, too poor, and too indebted to function. Economists called it service delivery insolvency, when a government can no longer provide the basics. The financial unraveling came from desperate borrowing. In 2005 and 2006, Detroit issued $1.4 billion in pension obligation certificates, essentially borrowing money to invest in its own pension funds. To make the debt palatable, the city entered risky interest rate swaps with Wall Street banks. When the 2008 crisis hit, rates collapsed and those swaps turned toxic. Detroit suddenly owed hundreds of millions in penalties while its revenue plunged. To keep paying, the city pledged casino tax revenue, its last steady income stream. By 2013, Detroit couldn't pay its bills. It owed money to everyone: bondholders, retirees, insurers, and banks. The city's credit rating was junk. Bankruptcy was inevitable. But under state law, a Michigan city couldn't file on its own. In March 2013, Governor Rick Snyder appointed Kevin Orr, a bankruptcy attorney, as emergency manager under Michigan's controversial takeover law. Orr replaced the mayor and city council, holding unilateral control. Critics saw it as disenfranchisement of a majority black city, but legally, it opened the door to Chapter 9. On July 18th, Orr filed the petition. Within hours, a state judge ruled the filing unconstitutional because Michigan's constitution protects public pensions. Federal Judge Steven Rhodes immediately asserted jurisdiction. Federal bankruptcy law, he ruled, superseded state law. Detroit was officially in bankruptcy court. The key issue became whether pensions could be cut. Rhodes ruled yes. He declared that pensions are contractual obligations, not sacred rights, and that federal bankruptcy law allows contracts to be adjusted. It was a landmark moment. State constitutional protections, he said, cannot block a federal bankruptcy. The ruling shook the bond market and terrified public employees across the country. But Rhodes's reasoning was pragmatic. Detroit's collapse wasn't about spreadsheets. It was about people living without police, fire, or working streetlights. To save the city, the court had to prioritize restoring services over paying every creditor in full. Still, the case was complex. Creditors wanted repayment through asset sales, including Detroit's crown jewel, the Detroit Institute of Arts. The museum's priceless collection was city property, and its liquidation could have raised billions. The proposal triggered outrage. To resolve it, federal mediator Gerald Rosen brokered what became known as the Grand Bargain. Private foundations, the state of Michigan, and the museum itself pooled over $800 million. That money stabilized pensions and permanently transferred the art collection to an independent trust, protecting it from sale. The Grand Bargain turned a potential cultural disaster into a symbol of cooperation and gave the bankruptcy a moral center. Retirees, once the fiercest opponents, voted in favor of the plan. By December 2014, Judge Rhodes confirmed the plan of adjustment. In only 17 months, remarkably fast for a case of that scale, Detroit shed about $7 billion in debt and earmarked $1.5 billion to rebuild services. Streetlights were replaced, police cars and fire trucks were updated. For the first time in years, Detroit could perform basic functions. The case rewrote the playbook for municipal bankruptcy. For decades, general obligation bonds had been seen as untouchable, backed by a city's full faith and credit. Detroit proved even those could be impaired. Investors took losses. The old assumption of zero-risk municipal bonds was gone. The bankruptcy also reframed the purpose of Chapter 9. The point isn't liquidation, it's restoration. A city doesn't exist to pay creditors, it exists to serve residents. In Detroit, that principle became the foundation of recovery. Services first, debt second. Yet the outcome wasn't triumphal. The financial fix didn't erase decades of poverty, segregation, and political distrust. Detroit's downtown revived faster than its neighborhoods. Inequality persisted, but the city gained something essential: time and breathing room. Detroit's story became a case study for other struggling cities: Stockton, San Bernardino, Puerto Rico. It showed that municipal bankruptcy could work, but only if state leaders, courts, and citizens align on a shared goal. The law alone can't rebuild a city. It can only reset the conditions. When Judge Rhodes closed the case, he called it a miracle of cooperation. He also warned that the real test would come after the headlines faded. Fiscal discipline and competent governance, not legal magic, would determine Detroit's fate. A decade later, Detroit's recovery remains uneven but visible. The lights are back on. The city runs balanced budgets. But the deeper issues, income disparity, education, public safety, still define daily life. The bankruptcy didn't end Detroit's struggle, it redefined it. Detroit's Chapter 9 stands as both caution and model. Caution that reckless borrowing and political denial can destroy even the mightiest industrial city. Model that creative negotiation, legal innovation, and public-private cooperation can give it another chance. In the end, Detroit's bankruptcy wasn't about numbers. It was about survival. The moment when a city, broken by history and neglect, stopped pretending it was fine and started rebuilding for real.